Hey guys, I'm here to get into perhaps David Lynch's ultimate masterpiece, Mulholland Drive. It's certainly tied with Twin Peaks to Return, but I think as far as the ultimate expression through a film itself, this is certainly his best and refined, I think, take on this. It's exploring the subtle sin of delusion, which he's always been very fascinated by his entire filmography. But this is perhaps the most emotional he's ever been at capturing how delusion can ultimately corrupt a person's true heart and spirit. And it feels like something David Lynch has been building up to his entire life. Like, quite a lot of his stuff does. I see this about the most important artists, along with like a lot of what the Beatles are doing. Really, the Beatles come back in a whole new kind of light. Honestly, it's really, really interesting. For David Lynch, I think I've been associating those two a little bit because I think David Lynch kind of progresses further to what the Beatles were laying out to the more avant-garde kind of places. It's like they're both equally perfect, kind of. I kind of feel like the mystic optimism lying in both here, but here, like the mystic optimism is present slightly throughout. It's kind of sense of adventurism, but it's certainly a very dark exploration of what I think a lot of what was going on in the early '90s, particularly. All the death and suicide hovering in the air with a lot of art. And I think David Lynch was certainly just kind of like saying something about a lot of that here, along with like, a film that really does kind of remind me a lot of Delusion. It really is basically My Bloody Valentine certainly evoked this as well, where it's like that kind of like place of love where it's real, but it also feels like something's missing, and then you kind of like go through this journey where you kind of gradually see what's missing. But honestly, it's just extremely entertaining. This is one of those films that's just truly an adventure because you get in all these different moments and you kind of almost don't know what you're doing here. But it's just somehow the way it's paced and the way it's told is just directly to the heart. Like this is ultimately, I think, one of the biggest examples of a film as a piece of music, which a lot of film is certainly striving for. Communicating the feeling of music. And this is just extremely interesting the entire way through, and it leaves plenty. That's very haunting about it. Like it's again that cautionary tale. It kind of like what a person goes through whenever their idealism is just gradually completely shattered. As we see through numerous scenarios, we have a film director Adam, and we have two lead characters like Laura, Diane, Betty, like all these different names. And sometimes it doesn't even add up exactly, but that's kind of it. This is supposed to be like a person whose idealism has been extremely shattered, and we're basically looking at her delusion for literally about 2 hours, and the film kind of just plays like just this ultimate film that's kind of about like what a lot of film is getting to the essence of, which is kind of the sense of delusion, and especially like through a way of like being a very disturbing kind of psychological drama, because it's kind of dreamy, but it's also very disturbing all the same. Like it kind of feels like, again, this certainly does kind of feel like it's happened into a haunting feeling because it lures you in by a feeling you might want, but then it's like it kind of gets you with like this is the harsh reality of the flip side of the coin. It's a love, you could say. That's kind of what the Beatles laid out, and I think David Lynch was the avant-garde contrast of the Beatles. The Beatles laid out with sort of such a joy, and then David Lynch came around and was like kind of rejecting a lot of that. That's the continuing foundation. This is really just. Yeah, I mean, some of the greatest acting ever too. Naomi Watts and Laura Herring both. I mean, they're absolutely perfect. And Justin Theroux also. I mean, all these characters are just perfect. I think Adam is debatably kind of like a lead character for also, because it is kind of that place of something's missing. You don't know what it is as a director, and it's very personal. Especially coming to this from the spectrum of film. And David Lynch certainly has a love and passion for film that's very unique and original. Feels like kind of being like a child of Stanley Kubrick and kind of moving forward what he did with this, like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, everything he did really, but the darkness that lives in all that too. But I think like Inland Empire certainly took us to weirder places, but what I think Mulholland Drive does perfect is it's just very straight to the heart in a very original way. Like Lost Highway is like a more cold-hearted, nihilistic, equally perfect take on this kind of thing, but I think this just gets to the heart the most. And almost, again, it continues with so much music is saying. Everything like Nirvana, even. Like just kind of an ultimate cautionary tale on what delusion is and how much that can just corrupt the ultimate sense of grounded idealism. This is just a real masterpiece, and it feels like there's so many layers going into here that feel equally entertaining as Lost Highway. But here it's just like it's like the nihilism is kind of sarcastic. There's a lot of sarcasm kind of looming over that one. But this one is just very raw and emotional. you're in all these characters. You get into just these different places that it could be like a kind of dark comedy. Sense of dark humor is kind of looming over. Again, a lot of I certainly feel a heavy Pulp Fiction influence too. That was certainly a film that David Lynch was, I think, really mystified by. Kind of looming into a lot of what that's kind of going for, and then evolving that even further, I think, to a place because it's dreamlike here. And I think Pulp Fiction is what is it to always live in a dream of just a gaze for film, you could say. Mulholland Drive is kind of looking at why that gaze can't last forever because delusion exists, and it's like a person can find an escape from something that they really a suppression, you could say, by way of diving into pop culture. But this is just there's like a flip side that can come out where a person can lose their mind, in the process eventually, when it goes very, very deep. And that's kind of what this is sort of showing, a very surreal kind of horror film. And I most certainly consider this a horror film. David Lynch is a horror director, I believe, in so many different ways. Much like how, a lot of Stanley Kubrick films feel like a horror film. David Lynch is just even more of a horror director because he cares so much about his characters. It's like he gets to the heart and he can tear it apart in a way that's just really amazing. It's really a masterpiece the way this world building is just so iconic, and it just builds something that's so massive for David Lynch. It feels like, yeah, this is really quite perfect. Like you're watching it, and it's like it's kind of one of those films that just came out of nowhere for me, but it really is just one that hits right at home because it just leaves you questioning what's going on here exactly. But then as it kind of moves forward, it's just like, oh, it's just a bunch of weirdness the way that only David Lynch could do it. I mean, yeah, that's just it right there. He just really kind of took this vision. And I kind of see a loose trilogy of Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and the Empire. They're all doing very deep, voyeuristic views of a man subconscious. But again, they all have different layers: a nihilistic, emotional, and then just kind of an anxiety-inducing. Perfect at hitting all three of those moods here. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Mulholland Drive is it just kind of has, like in David Lynch in general, he does have a lot of sincere care for humanity, as it kind of comes out here a lot. So like this in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, where just compassion is felt. A humanist as much as a surrealist. Like every time David Lynch is surreal, it always has a reason. It always has a purpose. Like it's not random, like it may always seem. And like a lot of people who attempt surrealism kind of go for, like sometimes I think that's where it can fail. It can be too random, but I think David Lynch always has a purpose, which is why he's such a great, wonderful artist to look up to. Like how the Beatles are. They're just wonderful artists to look up to. So they're just laying it out perfect. A certain perfect. And communicating with a universal kind of language. And David Lynch was, I think that's what I would come with the Beatles. They had to strive to be a universal in their way of communication. David Lynch just had weirder ways of doing it, but it's like, but yeah, I think when you really kind of get into his world, like it's like how Bob Dylan is. It just feels like it's just worth it because they're actually laying out a cohesive whole and original. It's just way beyond the depths of weird for weirdness' sake, but weird because it's true and it's just the dude's ahead of his time genius. And that's the way Mulholland Drive ultimately feels. Again, I always say with David Lynch, I think this is the film that made me fall in love with it. So, Blue Velvet I saw first, and I didn't get it because I was kind of coming off of Clockwork Orange when I first saw that, and I was I think looking for something. I don't think I was ready for something that emotional. Honestly, that's the thing. And then that's the thing about Mulholland Drive. Like very emotional films. Like David Lynch is certainly as hard as big in the heart as the Beatles are, but he's like the dark side, you could say. But that's Mulholland Drive, though. I mean, there's just so much going into it about, again, just seeing something gradually crumble through self-delusion, because that's a really common thing. Of course, so many bands like Radiohead were onto the same thing, where it's just like, but this, and I think a cautionary tale of suicide looms over a lot of this stuff too, like never letting it get to that point in a person. But yeah, I mean, this is just a very, very unique, original psychological thriller because it builds suspense by just purely focusing on a certain kind of psychological state. And just looking at a person's fear and anxiety and kind of just seeing what happens when they're in the heat of a moment. And the little moments that can add up to a person's mental breakdown. You could say that there's just a lot of struggles kind of going through the characters here. And they just... This really is just like, yeah, it's thriller, but it's also like a horror because it really is haunting. I mean, it's very tragic what happens in the end because it's like literally... the depths of Kurt Cobain suicide. Like it reminds me, I believe it's really illuminating on that particularly, and just metaphorically speaking to the universe about suicide. Now I don't in the methods of cautionary tale, because this is about as big of a cautionary tale as filming Taxi Driver because it's just as perceptive. I think the perceptive cautionary tales are the old time best films, and it tells one Space Odyssey is off in this one, but I think everyone else just about that's pointing a finger is kind of more of a cautionary tale of some sort. But I love all these scenes. Like the Silencio scene is just really perfect. The way that everyone just feels really insane and nothing feels right in the air. And this sort of is metaphorical to a lot of what was going wrong with Hollywood in a lot of ways. Where just in LA, Los Angeles, it just feels like everything is just so crazy. But they're looking for a light kind of place in the midst of the insanity. And that's kind of what the best artists of LA doing. Just looking for the light side. And I think these kind of characters we're looking at, perhaps we don't see the dark side necessarily until like the last about 20 or so minutes. But ultimately, we're seeing a character who's in a really crazy headspace because basically she was one of those dreamers who just went out and wanted to do something big, but it just didn't go anywhere. And this is kind of like a literary exploration of this is a why. There are things you can't even really talk about because it's such like a musical kind of note that it's talking into. And it holds up so well. This film feels certainly very futuristic. Like I feel like there's just something very timeless about this film. And it's a continuing foundation of what Twin Peaks is doing in a lot of ways, and everything David Lynch is doing, because this is like the most abstract David Lynch has ever been up to this point, most certainly. I mean, Inland Empire took it even further, Twin Peaks: The Return, but this is unique because it's more of the heart, I think, than those two would be. As much as I love those films as well, those films are slightly more of a cold-hearted tone lives in those compared to Mulholland Drive. This is not cold. This is like a lot of. I mean, just it feels like a summation of so much what music is doing. Honestly, more than anything, I think of like The Cure and whatnot. A lot of '80s, music. Like just kind of tender heartbreak, you could say. And it's certainly, again, like this is originally going to be a TV show, but I mean, this certainly I couldn't even imagine because this is such a film kind of expressionism in the purest sense, and it feels. The Silencio scene just captures something of a breakdown happening. What it is to have all this anticipation in your soul, and then you come to a moment where all that anticipation hits a dead end, and all that is for nothing. And it kind of breaks through to some madness from there. It's a trance. It's trance-like how the film puts you through all this, and it feels like, yeah, again, it's just uniquely ambitious in the way that this all plays out. I mean, this is just such an intense kind of drama. And it feels like. Yeah, again, I can imagine this is a TV show. This is just such a film. And if you feel like you're really in the headspace of a crazed mind, which is what so many films are getting into. What is it? The essence of being in a crazed mind of some sort. So this is like a cautionary tale of just the limits of being a crazed mind. And I think it does it in a way more. And David Lynch taking on stuff like Nirvana, something matter like Nirvana's taken on, and is way better because it's literally like, and Bob Dylan does this better too. I think it's kind of like. I'm feeling really emotional, but it's like almost a mature and ultimately a modest way of saying it, not a screamo type. And that's talking about this. I love Nirvana, but I feel like they certainly inspired a lot of bands that are not so good. I don't think I like what they laid out, although I think they did it good. They did it well. 90s grunge did it well because the depression was just very real, like uniquely. But I think the message certainly is clear. Like it doesn't need to be as loud as grunge. And a film like this is like a moving forward foundation of a lot of grunge energy. Like it doesn't need to get that way because this right here, dreaming too hard, too much idealism, and when that becomes shattered, it literally hurts in the spirit so bad that it can result in just the suicide. That's the most terrible thing to witness here. So this is most definitely a very important humanist film, told in the most surrealist way. Particularly if you love music, this is a film for you. I feel like certainly it is perfect because it is like music and a lot of modern art, 60s onward, particularly communicates something of just like what it is to live in an escapism of some sort, in a reality. But this film is kind of just the dead end that can kind of come from a cold-hearted search. How about preferring this search over, like just too much over intimacy, like you could say. This is kind of a film that does get into some consequences, self-delusion, and how that can be a very subtle type of sin that can catch up to a person in time. And I think as far as being successful at being an original kind of film, this is about one of the best ever made, honestly. Like, I mean, because this is just very horrifying, and it's a certain kind of love story that just really breaks through everything in a way that's dreamlike, and it's horrific. It's like a noir. This is the best kind of film noir, like along with stuff like what was going on in Inherent Vice, but I love this even more because this is horror. This is haunting. I love Inherent Vice, dude. That's a perfect film. Capturing best ever at capturing a haze state of mind. Oh, I think Mulholland Drive. It's kind of the depth of consequence that can go. This is very abstract. What is it to like? I think a lot of films it does make me think of this. Certainly, 2001: A Space Odyssey, because it kind of gets into what is it to look at something better than yourself, and then only to see something better. A lot of '60s were doing. A lot of bands like Beatles had this, like just something better, something of a dream, and then only for a reality to not add up to this dream. Having naivete shattered. That's the thing a lot of these characters have throughout. That's really fascinating. There's almost an overbearing sense of naivete in the tone because you're kind of just seeing what it really feels like to have a dream. And a dreamer is so much of modern America art. Just what is it to be a dreamer and kind of be out in the real world and for it to feel funny. A lot of the 90s and 2000s, particularly, are out for this, and I think like 2010 has a little more of a melancholic kind of overtone moving forward. But I think here it's like, yeah, maybe a little like just looking at all this here, it's a dream of just kind of what it is to cope with a lot of guilt inside, and kind of just really, yeah, like it's a very original way of kind of just capturing something of a failure, you could say, and a dream. And the kind of guilt that she goes through, all the jealousy she goes through, like envy gets to her head. That's the worst part. That's like where a lot of the dreamers can lose it. I think by way of letting envy consume them. So it's like this is the dream that's important to see. No, this is like a very subconscious thing. Like like this blue box, the whole thing. It feels like a symbolic to something of a death, you could say, of some sort, meeting something of a death within the spirit. Because of course, when they go through this, like literally things go rotten. That is, you could almost say, a fourth foundation. That's what "2001: Space Odyssey" is doing. Like, what is it? That's like transcendence, and what the Beatles were kind of saying. But this is almost more like what Radiohead's kind of on. You could say by contrast. Mulholland Drive is just, just something horrific. Again, I love the whole cowboy scene. The scene with Adam and the cowboy. It just puts you in a moment that's very bizarre, and you almost have to laugh because he's very smart alecky. Adam is, but then the cowboy's just really out for something crazy. But this is just an extremely creative film. And it feels like a nightmarish fever dream kind of playing out, and it's just like a big maze and a surreal nightmare that just plays out as a perfect horror film. I think this is perhaps the best horror film ever made. I mean, I would always say The Shining growing up, but I've kind of seen now, especially now that I'm 30, I'm like, this is the better horror film. This is certainly a masterpiece of David Lynch, just capturing a dream. And it just makes me think a lot of the best stuff of this art of the 60s, the best forward-thinking art of the 60s was onto, which is that it's dark and depressing rather than really as happy as the Beatles were making it out to be. Although the Beatles do lay out the perfect foundation of the truest essence of being happy. I think I've realized. That's why I hold on to them so much. But, Mulholland Drive, it's like, this is just, it's certainly about the most powerful, important film to come out of, I think, the past, new kind of film. Along with like the stuff Paul Thomas Anderson's doing. This is sitting on the exact same place. It just really shows and portrays Los Angeles as a place where dreams are crushed by evil and, desperation characters who have their hopes shattered because they can't find what they're ever looking for. This is really a masterpiece that just, and Naomi Watts, she really portrays something special here, and it feels like she's about the best one of my favorite performances to come out of the 2000s, because it's like kind of capturing, again, naivete being shattered in a very organic kind of way, because this is just about a tone. That's David Lynch. He really is just looking for a tone that feels like you're a haze, what an endless kind of gaze. And by being honest about the depression out there, it's actually easier to retain that gaze. I think that's what a lot of these kind of guys were onto. So this is like an endless labyrinth of a mystery box. And this is just like a big puzzle piece, bigger than, it's just like Lost Highways and Inland Empire. David Lynch's mind is like a puzzle piece. Twin Peaks is almost like the most universal, or kind of voice. The '90s Twin Peaks, the new Twin Peaks is just like this. That's like this David Lynch had to come over. This is the much colder kind of David Lynch, but the best kind of cold. This is kind of how I think a man can walk cold. Like David Lynch lays it out perfectly. This film, and it really does kind of make you think about like insanity in people in a lot of ways. You kind of just see naivete and just how bad you might want something. but it's just you have to kind of just like know your limits from the start, because you meet people and just ideas can go to interesting and insane places, and the director's perhaps characters perhaps also kind of on something being odd out there, because he never a lot of bad things kind of happen to him. But all this darkness kind of happens, and then it gets into some, like even some like sexual attraction throughout the whole film is in the air. But then it ultimately builds up to all this is for nothing in the end, and it really does kind of portray just something really depressing ultimately happening. Um, and yeah, this is just really it really reminds me a lot of a summation of what a lot of Stanley Kubrick's the Forward Foundation, what Eyes Wide Shut's doing in particularly, because again I think Eyes Wide Shut is one of Stanley Kubrick's best films, because I think that completely retains a modesty. I think this kind of took that a little bit more mystifying places, even more emotional, even more raw, even more perfect, original. That Eyes Wide Shut perfectly laid out the foundation. I think Stanley Kubrick started this, and then David Lynch moved it forward perfectly. Because it's a film you just kind of live in it forever, and it's really beautiful in the way that you just are always puzzled by what's going on. It's the ultimate mood piece, just where suspense is always in the air. What is it to always look at the world with a tone of rich suspense? I think like growing up on a lot of films like the Godfather films, Apocalypse Now with Coppola, '70s films in 1970s Francis Ford Coppola laid a lot of this mystique. I mean, I think this film is out to question a lot of that mystique. It's like, what is it to just always kind of live in that sort of gaze and just looking at the face of evil with wonder, you could say. This is, just really one of the best films ever made. I mean, this is absolutely a top 10. Always will be top 10 material, because the power of it hits like a ton of bricks. And I mean, this is like just David Lynch always upping himself. That's the way he was when he's this films. He's always upping his confidence in how he expresses his vision when he makes his stuff. And Mulholland Drive is certainly just the biggest forward-thinking foundation. This is genius stuff, honestly. I mean, David Lynch just really lays this out so originally, and it leaves you so much to ponder. I mean, you got a hilarious Billy Ray Cyrus cameo. I love that. I mean, it's just that's a crazy scene. The way he tears Adam apart. It's terrible what happens to Adam. I mean, he just keeps going through these situations, but he kind of just keeps taking all these punches, and just like I think that's the director attitude. You just keep taking punches and you just keep moving. No, that's the thing about David Lynch. Like, and it's like again, that's something else he has in common with the Beatles. It's just a lot of they get a complicated thing across with simplicity. You could say. Like, I know this film feels like it's far from simple, but I think the core idea and what it's really exploring is pretty simple. It's just it's almost just a straightforward biopic of like a dreamer. And no matter how famous and how big you get, there's a whole other side to a person. Like there's a duality of like, is the person actually good? I'm very haunted by the films of Francis Ford Coppola, like much with like Roman Polanski, where I'm like, dude, I know that man ultimately was corrupted. Actually, the man turned out wasn't such a great person, in some kind of ways. I think I don't know. He's I have a lot of mystique on that man in the new film he's making. But he's certainly a little horrifying. David Lynch is kind of looking at stuff like that. Again, almost as a forward-thinking foundation of what Ingmar Bergman's doing with his most experimental stuff, like Persona, as far as just like over-revelation to a person and kind of how that can lead to delusion in a lot of ways, and just kind of meeting something in yourself that you're afraid of, but when you ultimately meet it, you kind of feel better, because it's like the dark side of a romance. There's light and dark to romance, and this is like the dark side being captured in full essence by the metaphor of Hollywood being a dark place of hell, because a lot of artists were about to portray Hollywood as hell. But what is it to kind of like have be in a place of heaven as a creator, be it in the face of hell? That's what David Lynch is kind of a walking force of, the expressing. He did it with everything he's done with like Blue Velvet. I was thinking like Eraserhead's perfect at expressing raw anxiety. Elephant Man had to get out, realize he's the humanist. I think Blue Velvet's whenever everything just came together. Moving forward, every single film he made was a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. And then the Twin Peaks: The Return's even better. It's like David Lynch. I mean, more entertaining at least. I think Mulholland Drive is probably more important actually, though. Well, this film is the most important thing David Lynch made, because he's just going insane basically. Like, this is kind of about insanity, and just what it is to just go completely crazy gradually. What kind of the beautiful moments kind of realistically look like. And it feels like a lot of this is built up to the Silencio scene, truly. That's the kind of what the build-up is and what there is to grasp on. But I mean, there's just so many different ways you can feel this because it's like how music is. Like music, takes everyone to such a personal place and foundation. But like like just the soundtracks and whatnot, every way it kind of moves everything forward here is very, very beautiful. It's very subtle, very, very spacey, and it takes you to another place entirely. And that's just how David Lynch operates. He just, and again, like just, yeah, he's always out to kind of leave you questioning. Like, it's like living in a sense of wonder is to reward you with all kinds of, original things to think about and ponder. And that's just how this operates. I mean, it's really quite amazing. Um, it's really flawless. I feel like it's kind of just one of those films. And again, I think I treat the Beatles like this, just like with David Lynch films. Like, I don't think I can watch. I want to sit down and watch scenes all the time because perhaps it's so personal that I feel like I want to kind of reserve it for those kind of moments where I feel like I need it. So it's like, but they live in my spirit forever. It's just one of those ones that you don't stop thinking about it because it's very harsh and haunting in its own kind of way. And again, it's like how all this in the end turns into a suicide, basically, a person going completely mad and crazy. And that's kind of the start of the 2000s. It's like, don't let it get. I think there's that quiet place of don't let it get to a place. Don't die, basically. So yeah, because there is real hell out there, and this is like a place of maybe it can come from like getting too close to people, feeling in love, but then you don't actually get to experience, the depths of that love, or evolve it to a deep enough place that can drive a person like subtle things. That's just showing a bunch of subtleties and how it can drive a person crazy slowly. But there's a dream logic living inside all of this, and that's what you're holding on to. Again, it's a bit of a feeling of I'm not sure how I got here, but somehow this makes so much sense that I'm going with it because the impact is about to be like very original, like an alien came down to Earth and told me something better and prophetic, you could say, because it's true. This film always comes back. And I think what prophetic, it's like the stuff that you're not in the mood for now. But when it comes back to you, it's like, yep, that's what I needed. David Lynch gets that, and the Beatles get that too. It's like, yep, that's the one I needed right there. They do it in a way where it's like it's very, very surreal how common this occurrence happens. I'm always coming back to it, and I'm just kind of in something of like a heaven on earth, but David Lynch is like kind of looking at a nightmare on earth. And it's just what lost love can kind of feel like slowly, but living in a dream, living in somewhere better, you feel, but then expressing that no, like it's actually not all right kind of place too. In the end, it kind of gets into the horrors of it's not all right to a place of, and when walking that so hard that it leads to an ultimate death in spirit, which is metaphorical. Again, so much of hell of Hollywood that lives out in a lot of that. This is kind of just how these characters walk it. I mean, again, one of the best parts of the Silencio scene is just Rebecca Del Rio. I mean, I love her character in 2 Weeks to Return. The way she sings the song is just so beautiful because the love isn't real anymore. It's like realizing that, oh, that was a fake love, basically. As the love of Hollywood feels fake. If it's all an illusion, what's one to do? It's just to kind of look at it for what it is. The films itself, and the music itself, simply perceive it itself from a distance, rather than getting too close to every single little detail about the people creating it. It's just like eventually it's just like this is just a vessel and a voice that is mystic optimism. And this is like what it is to just not be able to hold on to that mystic optimism anymore. It's just like you kind of see through it. Maybe there's just the world just feels too cold and harsh and indifferent towards you could say. But this is a really powerful film, and this is kind of just getting into a lot of suppression of memories, you could say. And this is just perfect. That feels like in every kind of way. This is a film that leaves you contemplating timelessly because that's Mulholland Drive. This is honestly the David Lynch film. It's hard to say because it seems like now organically I would suggest Blue Velvet, but this is the David Lynch film that got me because again, literally just that feeling of how did I get here? But this took me somewhere better philosophically and entertainingly. And he does it with entertainment. That's the thing about David Lynch and how the best ones do it. They could take you through a genius place without realizing, while feeling like I had a good time getting there, you could say. But of course, in the end, it's out to haunt you too, because that's the power of film. It's a film that can also communicate a feeling of spirit to you, an atmosphere of dread. And this is just a very successful film at just being very layered at doing so, and just portraying all these, perceiving all these different scenarios playing out as they add up to this ultimate mood. That's the, you know, I think it meant another director I see a lot of connections like Robert Altman. Who oh my god, I love Robert Altman. He's becoming literally probably my biggest one of the biggest heroes as a director, along with Paul Thomas Anderson, and David Lynch too, because David Lynch I think is continuing this forward foundation of what a lot of Robert Altman's doing, juggling a lot of characters and just kind of being in a moment and getting into surrealism, particularly in a film like Three Women. But then David Lynch takes that even further because, yeah, David Lynch is just kind of like taking all that to just like, a lot of different characters in a very surreal kind of way. In a lot of ways, these kind of surreal places and the way that these different storylines add up are just places that, like, the thing is, it almost just adds up to a heartbreak. I think that's the message and idea. Like, I think a lot of people are like, I don't know where this is going. I think the feeling is because there's a feeling of dread kind of being captured, as all the characters are going to be heartbroken in their own ways. And that's the level of suspense it's kind of begging to be to be felt on, much like how the best music's doing. Like, it's just kind of an assumption that, there's something funny in the air. The film kind of lends yourself directly to anxious moods and thoughts as a way of just kind of, letting out releasing a certain kind of suppression within. And yeah, and then where finding the limits of delusion and where it's taken too far into a place that's insane past the point of return. Because there are certain limits you just don't ever want it to go to, as this film masterfully portrays. Yeah, certainly David Lynch's best film, I think, and most successful and universal at capturing a downfall in spirit by way of just shattered optimism, shattered idealism, just taken really really far to the depths of hell, and where it can take a person's mind, worst places. It's like there's a danger. So yeah, I think this is a very original, perfect film. I highly recommend Mulholland Drive to anybody. This is a perfect film. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, especially if you're into music. I mean, if you like a lot of bands, I think this is a film that certainly kind of gets into the idea of a lot of music. So I think this feels like a music being expressed, much like the films of Stanley Kubrick. David Lynch was on that similar notion, more emotion and more care for the characters. Like, that's where Robert Altman again comes in. He's known for being extremely friendly with his actors. David Lynch has that same kind of notion. He can be cold-hearted and he can be the nicest man. It's like, that's awesome. So the Beatles have that magic too. So that's the forward-thinking foundation. That's what it always comes back to. Like, it comes back like a boomerang in time. That's Mulholland Drive. It's absolutely perfect in every single way imaginable.